20,000 years ago, the Laurentide ice sheet began to recede from what is now New England, scraping out the basins of kettle ponds, shaping the coastline, and depositing great rocks called glacial erratics across the landscape. Some 8,000 years later, Paleo-Indians would follow their game into the area, megafauna like mastodon, and then smaller animals like caribou and deer. Eventually, the ancestors of the Wampanoag people would come to occupy the area, and a subgroup called the Patuxet would settle in and around modern-day Plymouth. A complex society with their own forestry, agriculture, trade, and cultural traditions, they were struck by disaster in the early 17th century. A disease, carried over from contact with Europeans, ravaged their population. When the Mayflower arrived in 1620, they found far fewer of the native people than they would have only a few years before. Subsequent waves of Europeans would make their way to the area by way of whaling vessels, fishing boats, and textile mills from Cape Verde, the Azores, Ireland, Poland, and Quebec. That is another much larger story, but it's those communities that give rise to a name, Cachalot. It is a word of French and Portuguese derivation, meaning big head, and it's the term for a sperm whale. Joe Allen, a columnist for the Vineyard Gazette, suggested it as the new name for the New Bedford-Fairhaven Council in 1933, when it reincorporated, to recognize the area's whaling history. This was a time when the islands of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket were still part of that council. The Cachalot Council would eventually loan its name to Camp Cachalot. This is Camp Cachalot's story. The earliest records of Boy Scout encampments in the New Bedford-Fairhaven Council date to the summer of 1916, when the Barnard Estate on Mattapoisett Neck hosted scouts for at least 6 weeks. No photos of this encampment are known to exist, nor do we have any records from the following summer's 8-week encampment at Shore Acres. In 1920, the New Bedford-Fairhaven Council acquired their first camp property, a 53-acre plot of land at the intersection of Potomska and Rockadundy Roads in Dartmouth. This camp, originally dubbed Camp Warren, but soon more typically called Camp Rockadundy, would serve as a summer camp for 16 years, with a friendly rivalry building up between the camp and the Fall River Council's Camp Nokachoke in Westport, including many hikes between the two camps, as well as competitive events. One of the earliest camp songs from Camp Nokachoke even has a little jab at Camp Warren. By 1936, its limited size and lack of any water access would cause the council to seek out new accommodations, and it was eventually sold in 1953. From 1937 until 1942, the Cachalot Council would send its scouts to Rockadundy's old rival, Camp Nokachoke, for summer camp. For reasons that were not elaborated on, this was deemed unsatisfactory. During the war years, 1943 through 1945, the Boys Club camp in Wareham, Camp Maxim, became available as its director was off in the service, and the Cachalot Council used it for summer camp for those summers. This program was initially run by New Scout executive Tom Cullen until his untimely death in 1944. After the end of the war, the Boys Club returned to using Camp Maxim, and the Cachalot Council was once again on the hunt for a summer camp. To purchase and develop a camp, the council conducted a major capital drive, successfully raising $50,000 to support the effort. A search committee was formed, including Ray Colville, Rafe Mutterpearl, Joseph Novick, and Francis Quinn. Several properties were considered, including an area around Fawn Pond in Plymouth, owned by local cranberry grower LeBaron R. Barker. When the search committee expressed interest in his property, he politely declined, saying that he was comfortable with his current arrangement. Just 3 years later, he would donate a large portion of that land to the Squanto Council, where it would become the third and current site of Camp Squanto. The search committee would find their property at the suggestion of Daniel Potter, the forest supervisor of Miles Standish State Forest. He mentioned that a large tract of land at the southeast corner of the state forest, including several pristine ponds, was held by Theodore Steinway of Steinway piano fame, and a few others known as the 5 Mile Corporation. Mr. Steinway was interested in selling the land, but did not want it to go to a developer. A deal was struck, and Mr. Steinway agreed to sell the land to the Cachalot Council for $12,000, claimed to be the same price he had paid when he purchased it in 1932, at the height of the Great Depression. On March 28, 1946, at 10 past noon, the transfer of the deed was filed, and Cachalot Council took possession of their new camp. The first scouts to camp on the property were a group of senior scouts, including Ed Tavares.
A week or two before camp opened, my outfit, and at that time there was a senior scout group called the Senior Scout Outfit, which could have Sea Scouts, Air Scouts, and Explorer Scouts in it. And Senior Scout Outfit 15, which I was a member, decided to come to this new camp that we just bought. Nobody had camped here from Scouts yet. So the 5 of us got left off at Squirrel's Nest, which is down where the Elks are, down on Route 628 there. And we hiked in 2.5 miles of town road, 2.5 miles of dirt road. Well, it took us 2 days to get here. We thought this was a great journey. It took us 2 days to get here. And finally found it. And of course, all that there was no clearings except the clearing right behind the beach. No signs of civilization except a well point driven down there. We didn't even have the pump. And so we stayed here for several days and hiked back and picked up. And that was the first scout camping expedition camp.
He'd returned to the camp in just a few short weeks, with the rest of the staff traveling in the back of a military surplus truck that also carried the gear for the season.
We started from downtown New Bedford, 105, something like that, down to William Street, the scout office was. In a big Marine Corps truck and an old Ford station wagon, all the staff and all the equipment for the summer. And the only way into camp was by way of the road that comes into what is now Scoutcraft by the Strange Folks. You couldn't come in from Haddon Pond. Technically you could. There was a road that's now overgrown that came in from the northwest corner, came down to the beach, and if you were lucky you could make your truck go across the beach and then pick up the road to the other side and then continue on. But we didn't know about that yet. So we came in that way, got lost. The whole staff and all the equipment. We should have taken a left fork, we took a right fork, and ended up somewhere near the dam or someplace up there. And so we turned around and came back, and finally we arrived here. It was well on into the afternoon, I guess, something like that. And we had to start setting up. Screw on the pump on the well point, and had to set up his coal-burning stove. This coal-burning stove set up, and we had to set up the dining tent, which is everything was going to be down there. We hadn't cleared any campsites yet. That was tomorrow when the kids get here, and including latrines and all. And we had this big package, 20 by 40 or 20 by 60, something like that. Navy hospital tent, heavy dark canvas. None of us had any idea what it was supposed to look like out. By this time it was dark. We had to put on the lights from the 2 vehicles to put it up. We're putting up this thing. We don't know how it's supposed to look. We're getting lost inside of this massive thing. But somehow we got it up. And anyway, when the kids arrived, we were ready. As ready as you could be under the circumstances.
That first season was quite a bit different from what we'd think of as summer camp today. Under the leadership of first camp director Roland Denault, scouts attended on their own, with members of the small staff serving as troop leaders. Half the day was spent working on the property, with the other half spent learning scoutcraft skills. The council didn't turn away anyone who wanted to attend, but if you could afford it, it'd cost you $5 per week. Those early years were a mix of construction and learning how to run a summer program. A few local companies helped build out parts of that early camp.
Sullivan Foster was on this side of the pond, and Granger was on that side, and the thing was every Saturday who could build tent platforms and latrines the fastest. But the way we got all of these guys, and it was free, we didn't spend a nickel. All of these carpenters, the Carpenters Union, blessed it, gave us their help on Saturdays for nothing. But the deal was, they brought their wives and their kids. And the wives roamed around and played cards, and the kids were on the beach all day long. And at 5 o'clock and at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, I don't know if it's still a vacant area, but maybe 100 feet in from the beach right now, there was a clearing. They dug a long trench, me to you maybe, with 2 large trees on the sides. And we put grills on there after the fire had been going like crazy. And everybody had a steak cookout. And the wives and the men and the kids, they loved that. It cost us just for the food. We had all of this stuff put up. A lot of the wood was donated too.
Only a few buildings were built in the first few years. The 21 Club was moved from its original location in Westport. An admin building, which we today call the Phillips House, was built, as well as a Quonset hut for storage and a few outhouses. The first large structure built at camp was the dining hall, replacing the old hospital tent that served that purpose for the first few years. It opened in time for the summer of 1951. The original footprint was much smaller, with the kitchen occupying the western end of the building. Electrical power was brought to camp for the first time a year later, specifically for the dining hall. A trading post was built in the early 1950s, along with the health lodge, the first waterfront tower, and an outpost shelter at Abner Pond. The layout of Cachalot in the 1950s and early 1960s was a bit different from today. There were 2 main camping areas. Nob Hill was on the southern side of the pond, beyond the dining hall, and Sleepy Hollow on the northern side. Each area had several campsites with tent platforms for use during summer camp. Tom Cullen Field was cleared in the mid-1950s, with a memorial archway erected. Cullen had been active with the local Kiwanis, who had made a significant donation in his name to the original capital campaign to purchase Cachalot, in the hopes that it be used for an amphitheater or other space to celebrate his love of song and camp fun. The summer camp program in the 1950s was closer to what we'd expect today. Most camping was still provisional, but an increasing number of troops started to attend together. Days were filled with merit badge instruction, swimming, and boating. Plaques began to appear in the rafters of the dining hall. If you've taken life-saving merit badge, you certainly recognize this scene being shown here, getting out of your street clothes in under 20 seconds for an active rescue. Magee Day would also begin to be celebrated at Cachalot to recognize the contributions from the George W. P. Magee Memorial Fund. Mr. Magee, the former manager of the Boston Opera House, left a substantial portion of his estate to this fund, which was to go towards the improvement of Boy Scout camps in Massachusetts and New England. It's difficult to overstate just how important the Magee Fund has been at Cachalot and other camps. Nearly every part of Cachalot has benefited from monies donated by the Magee Fund, and over the lifetime of Cachalot, well over $500,000 from the fund has gone into maintenance and improvements at camp. Canoe trips down the Weweantic and Agawam rivers were regular occurrences, some of which went along the coast as far as New Bedford. A ranger program was run for older boys during several summers, developing new groups of youth leaders that would return home to improve their own units. 1960 saw a few more buildings built at camp, including a rifle range, a new shower house, a cook's cabin, and the boathouse on the shore of 5 Mile Pond. And in 1961, the dining hall became Prescott Hall, taking its name and its plaque from the dining hall at the old Camp Rockadundy, which had been named in honor of Oliver Prescott, Jr. He was one of the early influential board members of the New Bedford-Fairhaven Council. The next big construction project on the schedule was set for May of 1964, a new, larger trading post across from Tom Cullen Field. A foundation was poured, and framing was set to commence on May 22nd. May 22nd was also the opening day of the spring camporee, and over 700 scouts made the trip out to camp for what was supposed to be a fun weekend. Fate had other things in mind. What started out as the promise of a fun weekend turned into an evacuation, as a massive forest fire moved towards Cachalot from Miles Standish State Forest. Cachalot sits in a pine barren, and fire is a normal part of the pine barren ecosystem. This was no act of nature. This was the result of an arsonist who lit no fewer than 63 separate fires. Wind and weather drove the flames directly across Cachalot. The path of the fires split as it approached 5 Mile Pond, with foresters and firefighters protecting the area around the pond as the outer camp was devastated. The fire burned for over 2 days, eventually reaching White Island Pond to our east. At its peak, it burned over 11 acres per minute. Over 5,500 acres were consumed, including most of Cachalot. The defense of the area around 5 Mile had saved many of Cachalot's buildings, but the outpost shelter at Abner Pond, the original cook's cabin, a commissary building, and all of the tent site latrines and platforms were destroyed. The Quonset hut, which stored gasoline and other flammables, exploded. Thankfully, the scouts escaped without any major injury, although several units lost equipment they had to abandon at camp as they fled. Over 500 people and 260 pieces of equipment from as far away as New York State helped beat the flames back. The fire caused an estimated $500,000 in damage, which is over $4 million in today's dollars. Nearly $25,000 of that damage at Cachalot. The damage to Cachalot was so severe that the council board briefly considered abandoning the property completely. Thankfully, that did not come to pass, but the question remained, how could Cachalot recover? And where would scouts camp while it did? A restoration committee was immediately formed, with Clarence Frederick taking the chairman's position. Clifford Davis, John Humphreys, Ronald Loranger, Ed Spencer, and Ed Barecki would make up the committee, with Scout exec Bob Patrick advising. Edgar Ryder, Armand Guillemette, and Fred Prefontaine would join soon after. A plan to clean up the property and to do some restoration and reforesting was quickly settled on, but Cachalot was to remain closed for 2 years. To pay for the restoration and to expand Cachalot's capacity, the board set out to raise $75,000 in capital with an aim of cleanup, reforestation, replacing destroyed buildings and equipment, and building new facilities to reopen the door to adventure. For the summers of 1964 and 1965, the Cachalot Council sent its scouts to neighboring Camp Squanto, which had not been hit as severely by the fire. The summer program was run jointly by the two councils, with Sumner Morse taking the lead role on the Cachalot Council side. During those same summers, a program led by Fred Prefontaine at Cachalot would host scouters and older scouts working to clean up the property and begin reforestation. During those years, a new cook's cabin was built, as well as the Andrew Jackson Waterfront Tower. Prescott Hall was significantly expanded by an addition to the dining room and an entirely new kitchen and dishwashing area. This nearly doubled the size of the building. The new trading post was completed, and a completely new maintenance building and duplex staff residence were built. Ed Spencer took charge of the reforestation effort, and at the advice of the USDA, organized crews that planted numerous black locust, autumn olive, and various species of pine across the decimated landscape. The council was recognized in 1965 for its efforts, being named the Conservation Organization of the Year by the Massachusetts Wildlife Foundation. Cachalot reopened for summer camp in 1966. Campers were greeted not only with new buildings, but by wide-open expanses, with only low brush and seedling trees over much of what had been pine forest. But despite the changes to the view, it didn't seem to stop anyone from having fun. Attendance at camp in the late 1960s was excellent, with 450 to 500 scouts enjoying the place during the summer. Nob Hill and Sleepy Hollow, however, were no more. 8 new sites were carved out, with the old Nob Hill area getting new sites using native names for local waterways, and the former Sleepy Hollow sites named for founders of scouting. Another major change to the landscape came with the creation of a wide cut around 5 Mile Pond, joining with the existing road system to provide a fire break should another catastrophe occur. The council would even change Cachalot's name in 1967 to the Cachalot Council Scout Reservation. This was done to emphasize that Cachalot was much more than a summer camp. It was and is a facility for scouts to use and enjoy year-round. The final years of the 1960s would see 5 more additions to Cachalot. The first council ring on the current site, built by the Agawam Lodge. a new All Faiths chapel dedicated to the memory of Raymond F. Colville, one of Cachalot's founders, Bob Fougier's pet project, the Adirondack shelters that would become the Baden-Powell site, the Texas Towers, a pair of iconic pioneering towers that would serve as Cachalot's gateway for the next 10 years, and, for the first time, a residence for a permanent on-site camp ranger, a role that would first be filled by longtime scouter Armand Guillemette. The reforestation effort would continue straight through to the early 1970s, with regular scheduled camporees and an award program for scouts participating in the effort. In 1971, after many years of low water levels in 5 Mile Pond, the council would purchase the cranberry bogs to our south. In doing so, it gained control over the water rights to 5 Mile, while adding 40 acres to the property and extending the camp into Wareham. Cachalot's attendance declined a bit in the first few years of the new decade, mirroring a nationwide trend in scouting membership, which dropped by 30% over the 1970s. In 1971, the National Council began recommending a merger of the Cachalot Council and Fall River's Massasoit Council to shore up finances and membership. This was met with initial resistance from the Massasoit Board, but by late 1971, both councils approved the move, and they combined to form the new Moby Council in 1972. The new council immediately found itself faced with $12,000 of debt. The summer of 1972 ended up being an experiment. The council would attempt to operate summer camps at both Camp Cachalot and at Camp Nookatook, but it would do so with a single staff. The staff made a noble attempt, but the experiment was nevertheless deemed unsuccessful, and 1972 would be the last summer with a Boy Scout summer camp at Nookatook, and the Moby Dick Council's debt would continue to increase. This all came to a head in 1977. The council found itself at the end of an unsuccessful fundraising campaign, with a substantial deficit and no credit, even with the National Council, which required upfront payment from the council for national supply orders. In these dire straits, the executive board voted by a nearly 2-to-1 margin to sell Camp Cachalot. The proposed sale was met with immediate resistance from multiple fronts. Brian Nobriga, then the lodge chief of Nemat Lodge, quickly engaged other volunteers in an attempt to block the sale, forming the Save Our Camps Committee, putting together an alternate plan. New Scout executive Summer Morse, returning to the area, found protesters on the front lawn of 39 Grove Street on his first day back. Ultimately, the council's financial position proved too much to completely overcome. Instead, the smaller Nookatook property was marked for sale. The money from the sale of Nookatook completed the settlement of the council's debts, with the remaining amount being split in two. The first half was used for immediate improvements at Cachalot. The remainder provided the seed money for the Moby Dick Council's endowment fund. Those immediate improvements at camp were the first major construction in nearly a decade. A frost-free water system was laid out, and 2 new cabins were built for winter use. These cabins, dedicated in honor of volunteers John Humphreys, who helped drive the post-fire restoration, and Francisco Escobar Jr., a longtime volunteer from the Fall River area, tripled the winterized space at camp, and all 3 cabins still see busy year-round use today. Starting in 1983, the Nemat Lodge would begin its largest, longest single-service project, renovating the council ring that its predecessor had constructed a decade and a half earlier. The seating areas had fallen into disrepair, the forest had encroached on the ring, and erosion was taking a toll on the entrance staircase. For 2 years of service weekends, largely powered by the boys of the lodge, the site was cleared, entirely new seating was terraced off and installed, a new stage raised, and a new set of entry stairs cut in, with the old stairs being replanted with trees to shore up the soil. To avoid taking up rentable space, those in attendance at these weekends would sleep on the floor of the maintenance building. Overall, the 1980s were very good years for Cachalot. The summer program expanded, serving 500-plus Boy Scouts and several hundred Cub Scouts over seasons that were 8 to 10 weeks long. The Ranger program was revived for several summers, this time under the leadership of Ray Phillips, but with the same goal of leadership development. The council also experimented with a resident camp for Webelos in the middle of the decade. Cachalot remained a busy place for the rest of the year, with units taking advantage of weekend camping, and the council and districts hosting many camporees and other events. 1981 saw the first Klondike Derby, initially a district event run by Bill Joyce and Vic Sylvia. The Klondike remains an annual event to this day, with 38 of the 41 Klondikes being held at Cachalot. It's also consistently one of the most well-attended events at camp. The Cabaret, another district event that became a long-running council event, also kicked off in the 1980s, with most of them run by Jack Byrne. The Cabaret got hundreds of cubs and their families out to Cachalot and got them excited at the opportunity to come back for more as Boy Scouts. In the fall of 1987, Cachalot had another bout with arson. Ranger Art Churchill, driving into Central Camp one cool morning, was shocked to discover the smoldering ruins of the trading post. It was extremely fortunate that the fire had not spread beyond the building, but the structure was a total loss. In addition to rebuilding the trading post, several other buildings saw upgrades in the 1980s, including major renovations of the 21 Club and Phillips House, and a large addition to the Health Lodge. 1990 saw the introduction of another long-running program at Cachalot, Nemat Lodge's Spring Into Scouting event, which gave Webelos a taste of the full Boy Scout experience with a weekend of scout skills, usually with a themed event-long game. Spring Into Scouting would be an annual event for the next 12 years. Strong attendance, both year-round and at summer camp, continued through the early 1990s. So did smaller building projects, including new waterfront docks, the addition of a shotgun range, and a new pavilion shelter at the archery range. By 1997, the Andrew Jackson Waterfront Tower had fallen into disrepair, with high water levels in 5 Mile Pond flooding the interior of the building regularly. In 1998, the Nemat Lodge set out to replace the tower, and with grant funding from the National Order of the Arrow, and from local donors, including a group of former staffers who called themselves the Falling Rock Patrol, they did just that. A new, larger tower, designed for both storage and staff housing, replaced the Jackson Tower, and the waterfront was enlarged to accommodate it. In the latter half of the 1990s, Cachalot joined forces with Anawan and Cape and Islands Council to form the Southeastern Massachusetts Camping Association, or SEMCA, becoming the designated Boy Scout summer camp for all 3 councils. It also entered a conservation restriction with Mass Fish and Wildlife and the Department of Conservation and Recreation, adding $1 million to the council endowment. With the retirement of Moby Dick's scout executive in 2002, the council was informed that it would not be allowed to hire a replacement. Some discussion was held with the other SEMCA member councils, but agreeable terms for a 3-way merger proved impossible to reach. A merger agreement was eventually made between Moby Dick and the Narragansett Council of Rhode Island, with Cachalot joining the other 7 camps used by Narragansett in a somewhat unique position. It was the only camp that would be owned directly by the council, rather than by the Rhode Island Boy Scouts, which had held the other 7 camps since merging with the Boy Scouts of America in 1917. Just after the merger, new housing for the summer camp staff opened near the East Branch Stream, a set of 3-season cabins named Magee Village, completed by new camp ranger Carrie Dumas. The old camp shower house was renovated, first into a lounge for scoutmasters, then into the Silver Fox trading post, with the former trading post becoming a more general-purpose building that hosted the handicraft area during camp and provided year-round storage, showers, and restrooms. In the fall of 2004, after several fits and starts, the Camp Cachalot Alumni Association was founded, with a goal of preserving Cachalot's history and traditions and to advocate for the camp. The alumni would host their first homecoming event at Cachalot in 2005, with attendees from many generations of campers and staff coming for a day at camp, in some cases for the first time in several decades. This would also mark the renaming of the old trading post as Nokachoke Lodge, to honor the legacy of Camp Nokachoke. 2005 also saw Cachalot filling an unexpected role. Narragansett's oldest camp, Yagu, was shut down for several weeks as the result of a norovirus outbreak. Cachalot was called upon to host units that had been displaced by the virus. Cachalot's staff, aided by members of the fledgling Cachalot alumni, stepped up to welcome these troops, many of whom were first-time visitors to Cachalot. The association would soon recognize resident ranger Armand Guillemette by dedicating the ranger's residence in his honor. We would build on this with the creation of the Camp Cachalot Wall of Fame, and inducted its first honorees at our homecoming in 2010. We would renovate and restore the Bill Joyce Memorial Flag Field with the construction of the wall itself, which was unveiled at Homecoming 2012. Since that first year, the association has recognized 23 scouters and organizations for their contributions to camp, including many names that you've heard in the course of this presentation. Another merger would happen in 2015, with Semka member Anawan Council. The merged Order of the Arrow Lodge would take the name of Anawan's Tulpe Lodge, which would soon embark on another project in collaboration with the Alumni Association, extending the pavilion at Nokachoke Lodge and building a new dedicated cookout pavilion in honor of longtime Nemat Lodge lay advisor Robert Lecomte in 2017. Prescott Hall would also see a major renovation in this time frame, with an expansion of the dining area, new landscaping, and cupolas for ventilation in 2015. Unfortunately, Scouting nationwide continued its downward trend in membership through the 2000s. The same was true both in local membership and in Cachalot's attendance. New Bedford, once home to dozens of units, was down to only 3, and the situation was similar across the old Moby Dick Council. Efforts by the Council and the Association had started to bear some fruit, however, with Cachalot's summer attendance ticking upwards in 2016 and 2017, while membership as a whole remained down. In the fall of 2017, new Narragansett Scout executive Tim McCandless, along with other council leaders, called for a fireside chat in Tiverton, Rhode Island. This chat was to announce sad news for the Cachalot family. 2017 would be the last year of a summer camp program at Cachalot. These are interesting times for Cachalot. The last 2 years, we've faced challenges from both EEE, which prevented overnight camping for much of the fall of 2019, and in 2020, like the rest of the world, from the COVID-19 pandemic. Cachalot remains open for year-round use, and the Camp Cachalot Alumni Association is doing everything it can to ensure that Cachalot remains a vibrant, vital piece of the scouting program in Southeastern Massachusetts. Our project fund and the proceeds from our endowment continue to support projects to make it a desirable location for winter camping and other programs. Our recent projects include improvements to all of the winter cabins and to the camp's shooting sports facilities. We have more being planned now. We want to bring summer back to Cachalot too, and we're working toward that end, but we know that we face many challenges and the outcome is anything but certain, as scouting itself continues to face existential challenges. 5 Mile Pond is still the jewel in Cachalot's crown, and many units, both from the area that was once Moby Dick Council and from outside it, take advantage of Cachalot's facilities each year. In 2018, nearly 3,700 scouts and scouters from 90 units, 20 of which came from outside Narragansett Council, spent time enjoying Cachalot. We continue to work to ensure that Cachalot is well used and well loved by the scouts who camp there. We hope that you and they can join us in supporting the place we know so well. Here's to the first 75 years. We're working towards at least 75 more.